Welcome to Leadership Matters, a podcast from the Bailey Group. I'm your host, Kaylee Thomsen, president of and partner at the Bailey Group, where we believe better leaders create healthier workplace environments, healthier humans, and a better world. On this show, we explore real stories, practical insights, and honest conversations to help you lead yourself and others better. Thanks for joining us. Let's dive in. Welcome back to Leadership Matters. I'm your host, Kaylee Thomsen, and today I'm joined by Tané Minnick. Tané is a business guide, an executive coach, and an advisor to CEOs with a career that spans leading and growing business inside organizations like Macy's, Patagonia, and UGG. Tané, welcome to the show.
Kaylee, it's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
It's great to have you here. I would love to start with your journey. You've had such a rich and varied career, and I'd love to hear from you about that path and also dive into some of the harder leadership lessons you learned along the way.
Yeah, I have probably a little bit more of an unconventional path, I would say, for sure. And I think one of the things that formed who I am, shall we say, starting my life in Europe, living in Switzerland. This is very common for Europeans. We go to all the countries all the time. I mean, you just hop in your car, in an hour you're in another country, and another country to the north and another country to the south. So it's pretty typical that we travel a lot. And growing up there with my mom, it was just the two of us. We would literally pack up the VW. It was a manual. There were no seatbelts. I'm dating myself, but there were no seatbelts. I sat in the front seat as a little kid, and my job was to hold the map and navigate. And so I was always looking for the signs, the milestones, the mile markers. So I was holding the map, always looking for the next city. What do we have to be looking for? And oddly enough, as kids in nursery school, kids are always drawing families, their mom, their dad, their dog, their cat, all of that. I was drawing maps and I loved it. I was fascinated by it. I thought it was so interesting and, it just really scratched my itch. And so that for me was really foundational, because what I really do is I build roadmaps. I build roadmaps for businesses, for leaders, for CEOs. And it's fun for me. I love it. It's fascinating. That's a theme that you'll hear throughout my stories. But I started my career at Macy's. It was a miracle, quite frankly, for me to get into the executive training program. And back then, this is in the 80s, there was no Amazon. So think about a time when there was no Amazon, right? Macy's was the king of retail. We owned all of retail. And so they had an executive training program that I got in. I was not a great student, so it didn't seem possible that I would get into something like that. But they saw something in me that I didn't even see. And I was in the training program. It goes for about 4 months, and then they start putting you into roles. I got in, and very quickly, I'm very scrappy. Right? That's kind of how I lead. I'm very scrappy. And one of the things that I love to do and worked really well in the retail business is recognizing patterns, connecting disparate ideas into a theme. It's a lot about what analysis is, right? We can be really good with numbers, but not always good at analysis. I was good at math, creative math. So connecting disparate ideas was really fun for me. It was like a puzzle. And so I kind of hit it out of the park, and I got promoted very quickly, kept getting promoted very quickly. And I was starting to, feel pretty good about myself and confident. And there came a time, I was at Macy's for a third of my career. So I was there for about 11 years. And there came to be a time when there was a job that I really wanted. It was a little bit more of a stretch. I really wanted that VP title. Wanted to be a VP before I was 30. That was sort of the goal at Macy's. And one of my buddies in my cohort had just become VP, and I thought, it's time for me, and I really want that job, and I didn't get it. And my mentor at the time, Angie and Piccolo, thank you very much for this lesson. He's pulled me in, he sat me down, and at the time, Darryl Strawberry, for those of you who are baseball fans, Darryl Strawberry played for the Mets. This was in New York City. So our home team was the Mets, and Darryl Strawberry was one of our best players at the time. He said, "You're my Darryl Strawberry." He said, "You every time you come up to bat, you hit it out of the park. He said, but you're lousy in the outfield. And he used those words. He didn't coddle me. He didn't say, you have some lessons to learn. None of that. He just told it like it was. And it hit me really hard, really, really hard. I was so sad. I was so angry, sad, all of those emotions because I thought I was doing so well. But I use that story all the time. And I think about him and that moment all the time. And it is one of the things that always pulls me back to what is my purpose here? Am I really showing up, or is my ego showing up? Am I being really present, or is, again, my ego showing up? And so that was a lesson for me that, and we'll get back to this because what I understood from this, not at the moment, but certainly in later years of reflecting on this, is self-awareness, the ability to have self-awareness. So I didn't have any of that self-awareness. What do you mean? I'm knocking it out of the park. Come on. That stuff. They don't need me out in the field. I just get me up to bat and I'll hit a home run every time. But it's essential for leaders to understand what it means to play in the outfield. And what it means to play in the outfield, and what I've come to realize what that is, and what he meant, is it's communication, right? It's working with each other. You have to be, and when you're playing in the outfield, you need to be looking at everybody. You need to be communicating who's going for the ball, who's going to catch it, who's going to go over and block, the runner, who's going to, what are we doing? Who's doing what? That's what he meant by that. It's really building the team and communicating with the team. And so that was a really important lesson for me. I didn't change overnight, but it gave me self-awareness. And when we have self-awareness, we have access to growth. Only when we have that self-awareness and enough humility to understand, oh, I'm not perfect. I'm not great at this. So how am I going to solve for that as a leader? So that was one of my really important first lessons. So after 10 years at Macy's, and we were like Pac-Man at that point in time. When I started with Macy's, we had, I think, 20 stores. And when I left Macy's, we had over 300 because we literally Pac-Maned our way across the country, buying up all of the retailers, all the department stores across the country. So it was a time of significant change, always acquiring more companies, learning how to merge with cultures, right? When you acquire a new company, then we have to say, how are we going to learn how to assimilate and blend the culture? How are we going to blend our systems? Which system is the better system? So I spent the first 10 years of my career doing all of that. We got to work with some of the top 5 consulting firms and search firms. So we worked with a lot of really dynamic leaders. I also worked with a lot of really bad leaders. So I learned a lot from both. And it got to a point in my career where I was feeling that we were too big, and business wasn't as interesting anymore because it was more of a handshake. When we developed a relationship with a vendor, we said, here are the numbers we're going to achieve, and it was a handshake, and it was less creative. I loved the creativity of solving problems and building new businesses. So I'm growing up in Switzerland. You can imagine I loved being in the mountains as a skier, as a rock climber. And so I was not an athlete, but I just loved being in the mountains and on the rock. So I reached out to Patagonia, and it was the right time. They had a retail division that was not profitable. They'd had it for about 20 years. They had 12 stores, not profitable. And so I joined them and started running the retail business, applied all of my learnings, let's say most of my learnings, most of my retail learnings, to this position and to this important division. And within 1 year, we actually made it profitable, and we never went back. And then within 3 years, we doubled the business. And within 8 years, we tripled the business. Wow. So I had a blast. Because it was, we go to school to learn things. And I think at Macy's was my retail MBA, if you will. I learned everything. I failed a lot. I learned a lot, tried a lot of things. And Patagonia was, for me, it was really important for me to work there. It was a small company. It was really difficult at first. I thought, these people don't even have the right systems. They don't do this. They don't do that. I was judgmental because I was spoiled. I worked with the best systems in the country, the best leadership, the best everything. I thought it was. And I got to Patagonia, and one of the first things that happened to me, I set up a meeting, and it was my first kind of bigger meeting with peers of different divisions, et cetera. and nobody showed up. And I thought, did I use the system wrong? Did it not go out? Did the invite not go out? I'd sent emails, etc., and nobody showed up. And finally, somebody explained to me that so Patagonia headquarters is in Ventura, California, and it's literally less than a mile from the beach, from the ocean. And when the surf is in, and we can't always plan it, it's just when the weather shifts and the surf is up and in, anybody can go surfing. So the entire group of people that I invited literally weren't there because they were surfing. Well, I didn't know this, but I think one of the lessons and one of the many lessons that I got working at Patagonia and going from a huge Fortune 500 company with thousands of employees, tens of thousands of employees, to a very small company with just, gosh, let's see, at the time, I think we probably had 600 employees, 500 employees. So it's very small, very intimate. But I didn't do a good job of listening. And I use the word listening because I didn't check the weather. Like, what's the culture here? How are people established? What is the culture? Instead, I barged in with my ideas, my values. Here's how we run a meeting. Here's how we do this. And it alienated people. So that's just one example, but I did it in other cases too. I said, well, this is how we do things, as opposed to how do you do things? Learning about their culture before setting some standards or establishing some things. And so this was a really important lesson for me. It took me several years. At one point, I wanted to leave. I had a great offer. And so we navigated through that together, but it was really where I needed to be so that I could learn a lot of these lessons of working with peers, communicating. It was back to the Daryl Strawberry example, right? I got to learn how to play in the outfield, and I thank Patagonia for that 10 years. So after Patagonia and having a lot of fun, I was inspired to go and get my MBA in sustainable management. And so I did that. And then I worked for a variety of some Fortune 1000 companies, some smaller companies as well at the C-suite level, doing a lot of fun things, doing a lot more learning about leadership and influencing and navigating boardrooms. And so it was a very different, sort of that last chapter of my career was very different and wonderful and rich. And then a certain point in my life, my stepdad wasn't well, and I left the corporate world and became a consultant because I decided that was really important to me. I wanted to be with my family. I'd made so many decisions. I've traveled so much for work, and even when I was with my last company, I had teams in Europe and London running stores. I was home maybe 30% of the time. And so I made a decision to be home and be more present in my family's life. And now I'm a business guide. I work with CEOs, I work with leadership teams, and I get to share with them my experience, what I've learned, where I failed, use my failings as lessons for all of us. And it's a really rewarding chapter for me. It's a more, my mindset in this chapter is more about service. I don't own a P&L. I'm not, chasing big numbers and growing big businesses, but helping others to do that is really fun for me in this chapter of life right now. And so that's why that's what led us to be introduced and got a chance to meet you as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's so much in there, Tané. And one of the through lines I hear in all of that is the superpower of self-awareness, which I know is something you're very passionate about. I'd be curious from your perspective, what about self-awareness do you believe makes it such a challenge for a lot of people leaders? We know the statistics out there that most people leaders don't fully understand what it means to be a people leader and have the impact that maybe they think they're having or are hoping to have. And I'd be curious to hear your perspective on what's the barrier there.
So when I'm working in my practice, when I'm working with leaders, 4 things that I really talk about in terms of using a model for how we're going to work together. And the foundation, the cornerstone for me is Jim Collins, right? He talked a lot about getting the right people on the bus in the right seat and getting the wrong people off the bus. I believe it starts there. And then I take it a couple steps further and I say, okay, we need to get them on the bus. Then we need to give them the map, Like, where is the bus going? And we need to socialize that. They need to know where they're going, and that's purpose. The third thing is process. So the bus needs to go, we need to know where the bus is going, but the bus has to have air in the tires, gas in the tank, a dashboard that's working. That's our systems, our process, our technology. The people need to trust that there's air in the tank. The people that we've got on the bus, we need to give them a good bus. And ultimately, the last thing is we need to give them a good bus driver, and that's leadership. People, process, people, purpose, where we're going, process, is there air in the tires, gas in the tank? And then ultimately, the leader is the bus driver. So if we think about that, it gets back to the first thing, and the most important thing is people. And so as a leader, and I will use my experience as the example, I know that I was most successful when I was stepping back, not leading the charge. So when I step back, it allows others to lean in. And so that is the self-awareness that I needed. So instead of charging ahead, and there's moments when it's good to charge ahead, like in a crisis, people want to know who's in charge. Absolutely. But most of the time, our role as a leader is to step back so that we are coaching and guiding and modeling for our leaders. Now, how this applies to self-awareness is if we are not self-aware, if we don't know, how am I showing up? We don't know that we need to step back. And so what prevents us, in my opinion, what prevents us from having access to our own self-awareness is our ego. So we can be blinded by ego. And ego, we need our ego. Our ego is what makes us want to take risks. Our ego is what makes us want to drive forward. So we want to be in healthy partnership with ego, but we don't want our ego to take over. And when our ego takes over, we're blinded. It's what creates the blind spots in our own self-awareness. I think self-awareness also, and we hear this with Patrick Lencioni, humble, hungry, and smart. So humility is a big piece of self-awareness. Are we coachable? Can we coach ourselves? And when we can do that, when we can coach ourselves, when we have enough awareness to recognize I'm making this mistake, or I'm going too fast, or I haven't communicated with my team, or whatever the issue is, that allows us to grow as a leader. That's the moment of growth as a leader. That's what makes us a better leader.
So powerful. You've talked before about how this self awareness is a gateway to
Mm.
extraordinary growth and results. And I'd love to hear more about from those early conversations. You have intentionally developed self awareness over time. And what does that actually look like in practice for a leader?
Yeah. So I think the example I gave when I was called Daryl Strawberry, and that was a foundational moment. The story that I shared about Patagonia, when I first got there, nobody came to the meeting, and I realized I hadn't really paid attention. It's these moments in our career, like both of those, that strike us hard
Mm,
if we don't pay attention. Our ego can just ride right over that. We can get angry and say, how come you didn't come to my meeting? Or we can
mm,
say, what was my role in this? So I think self-awareness stems from self-reflection. What's my role in this? Asking the question, what's my role in this issue? What I hear a lot from leaders is they do a terrible job. I need to fire them, or things like that. I keep going, well, what's your role? Where are your fingerprints in this? How did you hire them? Why did you put them in this job? Did you give them a clear roadmap for what their role is, for what their job is? And so most often, that's not the case. So we have to be able to access humility in order to understand that. Now, a great way to do that, and I'm a huge fan of assessment work. In fact, I'll give you a story here about one of my biggest challenges with an assessment early on in my career. I was at Macy's, and I was interviewing for a great job that I really wanted. And we were getting along really well. They flew me out to Chicago several times. And it just seemed like such a good fit. Is exactly where I wanted to live there too, because I had a lot of friends there. So there's a lot
mm,
of personal interest for me. And we were literally, they'd sent me the document. We just have one last thing. We're going to ask you to do an assessment. So I said, No problem. I've done plenty of these before, no problem. And when I did the assessment and turned it in, and I'm just not going to share any names because I don't want to throw anybody under the bus here, but everything stopped. Whatever happened in that assessment, whatever they looked at or interpreted the assessment, everything stopped at that particular point in time. And I finally, was able to get in touch with the recruiter to get a little bit of information. And of course, he wasn't able to share much information, but he said it was the assessment. And so for me, it's been a little bit of a mission because I firmly disagree with that. And there was a point in time, 80s and 90s, when we were a little assessment crazy. And we were giving too much power to assessments. And assessments are wonderful tools, but like any tool, it has to be used properly. Assessments are wonderful. In fact, I use them to help with hiring, not as a determining factor to hire, but as a tool to provide perspective, some insight, as a tool to give us the right questions to ask in an interview, but not as a determining factor to hire or fire. In fact, it's illegal in California to do that, which I think is a really good thing. So there's many assessment tools out there. The one that I use with everyone is called Aptive Index. And it's wonderful. It has a built-in LLM as well to kind of use and navigate. So I strongly encourage any assessment tool is great, truly, as long as we're using it in the right way and not just interpreting it on our own, but using it as a tool for perspective. And I'm sitting here talking about perspective. I'm going to share something with you. I have this right here. It's a little beach ball. And if I were to ask you, Kaylee, what colors do you see?
Blue, black, and white.
Okay, I see yellow and red. And this is the beauty to perspective, is that I get to see what's on the other side through your eyes. And think about this as an issue, a topic, a situation, interviewing a candidate, for example, right? If you interview them, I get your perspective. If I use an assessment tool, I'm going to get a different perspective, but it doesn't negate what I'm seeing too. It's a 360 view of the situation. And I actually leave this right here because it's a reminder for me that I need to know somebody else's perspective, including assessment tools as well.
I love that beach ball analogy, and it highlights the importance of having teams with diverse perspectives who have different vantage points on issues. I know you work with a lot of leaders, a lot of CEOs, and have talked a lot about the importance of team alignment. Where do you think most of the challenge comes from when leaders are trying to align their team and not getting full alignment to move forward and leverage all that individual talent effectively?
Yeah, it gets back to leadership. Right. I grew up on the East Coast and a lot of my family members rowed crew. And that's, you think of Boston, those long scull boats, right, that are flat, they sit on the water. And there's a team of, you think of Harvard especially, right, riding crew and sits low in the water. And you have these really long oars. And at the front of the boat, there's somebody called a coxswain. And the coxswain is the one who sees everything and who's calling the shots. Here's what you need to do, cheering them on, making sure that they're all in alignment. If there's one oar, because they have these really long oars, if one oar is out of sync, the boat steers wrong, slows down, gets distracted, falls over, capsizes. And it's the coxswain's job to make sure that they're all in sync. And that, again, is the role of the leader, is to make sure that they have the right people in the right seat, literally in this skull, right? Everybody's got to be in the right seat. Maybe somebody in the back is better because they can see everybody else in front of them. Maybe the ones in the front don't need that. They just they're hungry and they're going to set the pace, right? There's a role for everybody in that skull. And so making sure, to your point, that we have the right people in the right seat and that there is a balance. So building a high-performing team is about making sure that we have the right person in the right seat. And again, assessments can help with that. It can give us that perspective to make sure that we really truly have the right people in the right seats. But I think it gets back to either the bus driver analogy or the coxswain analogy, right? It is the leader of the team, whatever team that is, to first and foremost make sure is the right person in the right seat. Not, why aren't they doing their job? How do we make sure that the leader's job is really to make sure that the right person's in the right seat?
Tané, I'm all in. I'm bought into this. I want to be a super effective leader who's self-aware, has the right people in the right seats. Listening to all this, what's one small shift I could make this week?
Great question. I would say it totally depends on the person. There are leadership podcasts. There are great books to read. I would probably invite you to take a self-assessment, honestly. And there's one actually that I use quite regularly, and I would even send it to you. So if you want, I'm happy to send it to you. It's just 10 minutes, and it will give you the questions, really wonderful questions to ask yourself. And in that moment, when leaders take this a self-assessment, they go, I didn't realize that was my job. That's what I hear. So when you take this assessment, it will force you to reflect, am I doing these things? Then from there, it's up to you. You get to decide what action you want to take to make a greater impact on your team.
And where can the listeners reach out?
Yeah, they can absolutely reach out to me directly. There is a baseline assessment that's accessible on my website. And there is also the Active Index, which is the behavior and motivations assessment, is also a free link on my website that anybody's welcome to take. And you get a free assessment debrief with me, and I'd be happy to do that.
We will include ways to access those in the show notes. Tané, thank you so much. This has been such a thoughtful conversation with so much jam-packed into it. And I just appreciate your time and wisdom and experience.
Kaylee, thanks for reaching out. It's been a real pleasure. Really enjoyed it.
And for our listeners, thanks for joining us. Join us next week for another episode of Leadership Matters.
Thanks for joining us for today's episode of Leadership Matters. If today's episode resonated with you, would you do me a favor and share it with someone you care about? To learn more about the work the Bailey Group is doing in the world, check us out at thebaileygroup.com or follow us over on LinkedIn. We love sharing useful articles, helpful resources, and valuable tools to help you expand your leadership capacity. Like and subscribe, and join us next time for more honest conversations.